Welcome to the B2B Category Creators Podcast, hosted by Gil Alouche, founder and CEO of Metadata.io. This podcast is all about sharing the real and sometimes uncomfortable secrets of category creation in the B2B software space. On this week's episode, we have Mike Zani, CEO of the Predictive Index, the leader in talent optimization, and Allyson Havener, VP of Marketing at TrustRadius, the most trusted review site for business technology.
Awesome. Happy Friday, everyone. My name is Gil Alouche. I'm the founder and CEO of Metadata. This is episode, I think, 18, but I'm not really sure, of Category Creator Podcast. I have with me Mike and Allyson. Allyson, maybe you can start us off introducing yourself and your company.
Hi there, my name's Allyson Havener. I'm the VP of Marketing at TrustRadius, which is a B2B software review platform.
Awesome. Super brief.
It is brief. I'm Mike Zani, and I like TrustRadius a lot. We look at your data all the time, so thank you, Allyson. I'm the CEO of the Predictive Index, located in Rhode Island, where we have a hurricane warning. My phone just alerted me that we need to prepare. So the Predictive Index is a talent optimization platform, and we took a category strategy. So I'm excited to talk category.
Awesome. Beautiful. Well, I'm excited to have you both. Thank you for joining. Let's start off with category creation. So, part of this podcast is to really try to unveil the secrets and, everything there is to learn about category creation, from should you create a category? What does it mean to you? What are the tactics to actually create a category and dominate it? And so I'll start off with a simple question. What does category creation mean to you? Allyson, you can get us started.
So when I think about it, it's really answering a need in the market, right? So what was that kind of like paradigm shift that's happening that actually gives you the right to exist? So if you can identify that, that's when you create a new technology category.
Okay, so identifying like a need that was unmet before, is that kind of the summary?
Right, exactly. And I think also for category, like if I was going to put an adjective to it, it's the most difficult, right? So if you're thinking about how you're going to take your product to market, the hardest thing to do and the most expensive thing to do is to create your own category.
So when is a good time to create a category?
When there isn't a category that is sufficient enough for your product and to define it, right? So when you think about a market category, it's really the context that you're being placed in for your customers. So if you're, for instance, TrustRadius is a review platform, right? That gives us some kind of context and gives our customers that context. Now, if we wanted to be something completely different and there's nothing in the market that really gives us that context and really helps define who we are, then that's when you can really start investing in creating a category. But it needs to be partnered with that paradigm shift that's happening in the market.
Not just because you decided to.
Exactly.
Mike, what about you? I know you're very passionate about category creation. What do you think about? What's the first thought that comes to your mind when talked about category creation?
I really think it's. Am I muted? No. I really think it's a discipline, and I talked about it with my stepbrother, who was the editor of Adweek, back 20 years ago, and I really think it's like a subset of really high quality brand work. And when you think about it, it's sort of like this discipline where you articulate your point of view, you articulate why you do what you do, and so much of the value is just the exercise of you and your company, and the surround of your company, really refines what you do, and it really works well when you are in fact different, not just better. But even if you're not truly different, if you're out there and you're struggling to find out how you're different, that discipline, that exercise of going through your point of view, like why you do what you do and why you do it well, and aligning people on that, and really sweating the details about the language and about how you talk about it. I think it makes you a healthier company. So even if you don't take a category strategy, it's good brand discipline. And I think, you talk to someone, you could go to someone who's been a brand expert at Young and Rubicam for 30 years. And they're like, yeah, we've been doing this for years. They didn't call it category, but they've been doing it.
Interesting. And so you kind of, you're saying it's a little bit of underneath the branding exercise, which actually I've heard. I think I talked to Chris, the CEO of Sendoso, and unlike many others, he went into category creation from day one. That was part of his strategy, and he said that the biggest thing that he did is invest heavily in branding, which no one does in the stage A of a startup. So from your point of view, like that is kind of one of the biggest emphasis of category creation, branding, telling a story differently.
It is. I mean, going through the discipline of brand isn't expensive. It's telling the world about your brand that's expensive. So if you're a startup and you don't have a lot of money, say you're bootstrapping or you're in angel seed financing, I think the discipline of going through category, which is a niche subset of brand, is going to be really healthy for you. And whether you choose to spend the money or not, or you choose to do some of the activities that you might not have done otherwise or not, is up to you, but your company will be healthier for it.
I think the other thing too around branding is if like you could do it in more of an economical way, if you can get your, like one of the things when I was at LiveRamp, one of the things that we really focused on when we were taking data onboarding and creating that category is like we had to find the right customers that were going to tell our story. So it's like, how like you create that story, that branding story that everything is laddering into, but then you find those kind of like poster children customers that are going to take that story, they're going to adopt it, right? And then they're the ones that are evangelizing it for you. And I think that is like a way to do it that's like not as expensive, right? Like there's other things that need to be coupled with that. But if you can get those like kind of big customers on board and then use them to tell your story, that's honestly one of the best ways to go about it.
Both of you said very interesting things. And I know intimately the LiveRamp story just by talking to Oren and Travis May are close. So I'm going to go back to that in a second. Mike, you said even if you don't have money, you're a poor startup. Going through that exercise, even if you don't, how do you emphasize it or put the money into actually the branding execution, going through that exercise is important. Can you give an example? Like many of our listeners are Series A, Series Seed, CEOs, founders, and they're early on. They think, many of them, although it's maybe not the right way to go, think about demand gen or lead gen as the first thing to invest in. What do you mean specifically as going through a branding exercise or a branding kind of exercise as a means to an end to figure out what you are and what you're not?
So we have 750 value-added resellers, partners, so that when you do talent optimization, the software doesn't do everything. We have people in the field who do these things, and these partners, some of them have been with us since the 80s. So they've been practicing talent optimization for years. They didn't call it that. So when we started working on our category, we pulled a lot of our best partners in to help us describe what they do, because we consider them in our ecosystem. And these are small companies. They can be, single shingle, sole proprietors to, the biggest might be, 100-person consulting company. But most of them are small businesses, undercapitalized. They don't have a lot of money to spend on marketing. Most of them, even if they try lead gen, it's very rudimentary. So just getting them aligned on how to articulate what we do. It was an exercise. They were like, I've been doing this for years. I didn't know how to fully articulate it. And some of my peers did the same thing, but they said it in a different way, just aligning all of these little colonies of partners out there. They're not spending money, but that alignment exercise that we did with them sort of they were like, thank you for finally putting a bow on what we've been trying to talk about for years. And that was really just, it was a category exercise, but someone could have done it in the 80s as a branding exercise. And it was a really healthy thing. And they, in the end, they said, thank you, for really helping them articulate what it is that they do every day.
I mean, cracking that definition is, I think, at least for me, I'm a technical far more of an engineer than anything, and I think that's one of the hardest things to do, to kind of crack that story. I had Andy Raskin here, was talking about what was the old world, the new world, or old game, and new game, and it was fascinating. He has this like blueprint of how to talk about these things, versus like an engineer that usually just dives into the features of a product that no one understands to begin with.
Well, nobody cares about features, right? They care
No.
about the end solution and the outcome. So I think when you're doing this kind of exercise, that two things is you have to create a framework, right? You build that framework, you build that narrative. You have to get consensus across the entire company, especially at the C-suite level. You get that consensus, and then you evangelize that internally and externally, and you have to tell a consistent story. Otherwise, everybody's singing from different song sheets, and you won't ever create that category. Everyone needs to be saying the same thing all the time, right? It's all about consistency and not focus.
Let's talk about, I like that. Let's talk about LiveRamp for a second. If I remember what, I won't get into the conversation with Oren, but maybe the Travis is an easier one. I remember, I think he told me that he started as an intern, and there was pretty much like a back and forth trying to figure out what LiveRamp is for years. And it was like nothing. And then boom, like a huge growth in a few years. And then the acquisition. What was, I don't know if you were, you were there back then. Perfect. So
yeah, I started
story.
at LiveRamp in 2013. So I was there kind of during the early days, but what we really did is we honed in on data onboarding. And so when I look back at those kind of early days, what we did is we found, again, like there was like this shift that was happening for advertising to become much more targeted, much more like efficient with budgets, et cetera. And so when we thought about like our target audience and who we were really going after, it was like B2C marketers, right? Big budgets, big systems of record, right? They would have to have a really big first party audience. And so when we were data onboarding was, nobody was talking about that. That was not something to use your CRM to actually retarget or to go after your customers in multiple channels, right? And so that was not being talked about. And so we had to create that entire category. I actually remember like being in a conference room, and I was on reporting into our CMO, and we were writing the Wikipedia page for data onboarding. So it was like, and we had to do it everywhere. And I think back on it now, and we also really, really heavily invested in analyst firms, right? So we're like, hey, we got to create this category. We need the analysts behind us. And now that I look at it, now that I'm at TrustRadius, the like software review platform was not really around, right? So you had to go this very like old school classical way of like going through the analysts to like help you kind of break into like the enterprise. But now with a lot of our clients at TrustRadius, what we're helping them is we're actually helping them define that category for them and giving them a platform to do that. So there's less barrier to entry for people now, but like it was super expensive to go that route with the analysts, coaching them, teaching them, right, of our technology and the use cases.
Nice. Okay, so you're saying that for you, you had to spend a lot of money. I mean, creating a Wikipedia page is definitely the epitome of category creation. But
the most simple thing you can do.
Yeah, no, it's cool. I admire that. And with TrustRadius, I hear you're saying because you have that platform and you have all this data, you help customer, like startups essentially, or other other companies with that definition. Where do you fit? What is your background? Do you a loaded question? Do you find TrustRadius to have defined the customer reviews, or however you call that category?
Software review platform.
Software review platform. Thank you for keeping me honest. Do you find TrustRadius to have defined that category or create that category?
I think that there's actually like a few players in the space that are defining the category. And we're working on like the niche of the categories. You have some people that were really early on, like the Capteras and G2s, and TrustRadius is in there as well. And then you have like Gartner that made some acquisitions that are doing like the peer insights, but they each kind of have like their own, like Captera was very like lead gen. It's very pay to play, right? Like you pay to get higher ratings, you pay for leads. It's like, so it's a very different model than what we have. G2 is just pure volume, right? It's just like as much volume as you can get. So you can be placed higher on their list. So it's like almost like gamifying it a little bit. And then where I think TrustRadius is really trying to focus is just on the credible quality of the content and really actually positioning ourselves for the buyer. So who are the buyers that are coming to our site? And so we really have built the platform for them versus the vendors on the back end, right, that are trying to essentially acquire those eyeballs of the buyer. So, I think each of those review platforms kind of have their own model that I think kind of creates a category definition. So I think that's something that we're working on right now. It's like, how do we kind of rewrite the definition of what a software review platform is?
Allyson,
shoot.
No, when you were speaking about what you do, you reminded me that you like, it sounds like in Glassdoor for hiring, you are the Glassdoor for software. So you guys should do a podcast together about how they're working on hiring brand, you know, your employer brand. And this is sort of like the software piece of it, but there's a weird synergy there because you're doing such a similar thing and it's so valuable to the market.
Yes. And this is, one of the reasons, because I'm pretty new at TrustRadius. So I left LiveRamp about 2 months ago. And one of the reasons I took the job is because I was just like so excited of like this idea of like this neutral area where people can come and exchange information and have that. Because if you think about it, the cost of buying the wrong software for a company is like, it's very, very expensive. And so where these peers can exchange this information and like, kind of like warts and all, like you want to buy, no software is perfect, but you want to at least know where the gaps are so you can plan for that. And same with Glassdoor, right? Like you want to, like, you're going to go to a company, not every company is like all, rainbows and sunshine, but at least you want to prepare for that.
So many follow-ups. Let's take a pause. I'm going to pour myself another drink.
What are you drinking?
I'm drinking Japanese whiskey.
Oh, I've seen that before.
It's delicious. It's really nice. It's almost over.
Yeah. Well.
Cheers.
Hope you didn't start it at the front end of these podcasts.
Yeah.
I started an hour and a half ago with my first podcast today.
I hope it wasn't a fresh bottle then.
No. I'm only like a glass and a half in, so no, I'm good.
Okay, good.
I can't do too much. I told you I just went we did a 3 days company kickoff for H2. That was a lot of drinking. Cool. Well, let's change gears completely. Category creation is very interesting, but it's not everything. Let's talk about career for a second. Both of you, it's not your first rodeo. You've been in startups before, ups and downs. If you had to think about your biggest hashtag fail moment, like a moment where you were like you fucked up, or you're pissed, you did something that you could have avoided, and there was an impact, there was a consequence to it. It doesn't have to be LiveRamp, doesn't have to be your existing past career. You can go 10-15 years back. What was that moment that you really remember and you try to avoid?
I'll dive in.
So
God bless you.
I'm friends with my old boss now, but for a while it was pretty tough. But I was working at a sailboat manufacturer, and I was so upset at my boss that I was chasing him around a boat. When you're little kids and you're chasing someone around a table and they're always running at the opposite side. I was planning on kicking the shit out of him. And I just couldn't catch him. And the whole manufacturing floor, because we used to make sailboats, was like came out, and these are all pretty blue collar manufacturing, and they're like cheering us on. They're like, all right, Mike's gonna beat up Joe. And like I just had an out of body emotional experience that I've certain, like, I'm an emotional person. I'm pretty passionate. That's one of my gifts. But when it's out of control on the back of my t-shirt, it could take me out. And I haven't done anything that egregious, but I remember the first time I was a CEO, the board was pushing me on some forecasting issues, and that same emotion came up, and I was not being a great CEO when I was called on the mat for some forecasting that we missed. And like the ability over time to control that demon, find out what that thing is that triggers you and when it comes on, so that you can short circuit it. Because it was definitely not me on my best day when I'm chasing my boss trying to kick his butt or fighting with my board. There's just no win there. So for me, it was, controlling something that I have. This is an issue I have, and making sure it doesn't take you out.
I gotta pause there for a second. I think what you just said is very, very insightful. At least I can emphasize with this too much to an extent. I want to know what made you so pissed that you were about to kick the shit out of your boss. But I also want to just pause and say this: managing your psyche and managing your emotions and your triggers. You mentioned that. Hell, I don't know how many shrinks I've seen about that. That is very, very important. I think that's a big deal. And something that is overlooked many times, because you may survive life and even thrive still having those issues, but the life that can be without it, when you can control yourself.
So there's this amazing framework. This guy Jim Allen, he's a partner at Bain, and he calls it front of t-shirt, back of t-shirt. So on the front of your t-shirt is everything you've been given a job for your whole life, and your parents talk about it. When you hear it, you puff up your chest, you're really proud. But just as clear and just as long of a list is on your back of t-shirt that people can articulate very clearly when you walk away from them and leave, because they don't want to say it to you. So this discipline of going on this journey to find out what's on the back of your t-shirt, to ask Allyson, what does it say back there? And you have to ask people, you have to contort yourself. You have to be really just amazingly self-aware. And you go on this journey because, one, don't take away anything from the front, because that's awesome. But the front is usually related to the back. So it's like if I took away my passion, I would have solved the problem of chasing Joe around the boat. But then I wouldn't get a job, So what you need to do is you need to articulate the front, articulate the back, and then find out on the back, what are the triggers? Because you live with this for your whole life. Like, I'm about to kill my son. No, I shouldn't kill my son. I should probably rethink that decision. So, and it's this journey. So whenever I'm coaching people, it's like, hey, what's on the front? What's on the back? Let's celebrate them all. And let's identify when and how and control the trigger. Because if you can do that, you can really be you on your best day more often, because you just don't get taken out by your dark side.
Very nice. We call it, at least I call it, shit to value ratio, but it's really pretty much like exactly the same concept. I still want to know, like, what made you so pissed at your boss?
It was an early job, so I was trailering boats, and Joe hooked up the trailer and he didn't fasten it correctly. So I'm driving down the highway, and this massive 12-boat trailer came off the van and spun me off the road, and I almost died. And I just,
my God.
And I was, and honestly, it's my fault. You should never drive a trailer without checking all of your equipment yourself. I thought he did it.
Yeah.
So my bad. Sorry, Joe, but I was going to kick his ass.
Wow. That is wild.
Sorry. It was early career.
I love that story. Allyson, what about you?
I love the self-awareness. I think, early in my career, I would say it's passion, right? There was a lot of door slamming, a lot of leaving conference rooms really upset. But I had a really good relationship with my old boss, Rebecca Stone. She's the CMO at Meraki now. And we worked at LiveRamp together for like 7 years. And so we had a really great relationship. But we had very similar personalities. So we were big personalities, wanted to get our way. And there was a few times. So probably my biggest like blunder, I would say, is like very, very early in my career, I was at a Marketo conference, and I thought I was in our testing environment. And I like set up this random email, did all this stuff, whatever. And like randomly scheduled it to be sent out on like this random date. So I was at one of our events in Dallas, and my phone just like all of a sudden, all these like all the bounced emails came back to my email address. And so I was like, oh, weird. What like marketing email went out today? And as I'm thinking that, my boss is calling me and she's like, what did you do? What did you do? And I was like, what are you talking about? So we dig into Marketo, found out this like, email template thing that I made went out to our entire database. And so like, it's like, this is like the most classic thing that like everybody has to do, I feel like, in their career. But I was devastated. I remember I was like at a restaurant and I just like, I thought I was going to collapse to the ground. And Travis May was actually the CEO at the time. And everybody was just like so supportive. They're like, hey, these things happen. And we like responded to it. Travis like wrote the whole company and was like, hey, we move fast, mistakes are happening. So I felt very, very supported. But also my boss was like, hey, like, look, like these things happen. You are now officially banned from Marketo. And I was like, yeah, probably I should not be in there. And so I think like, one of the things I learned in my career is you have to kind of build those relationships and really invest in those relationships, because mistakes are going to happen. Things don't work out. But at the end of the day, if you have those relationships to fall back on, it's like, okay, great. This was a learning experience. How are we going to take those learnings and then kind of move forward? And I think that was one thing that I really learned at LiveRamp. And we were just like such a close group of people that had been there very early on. And as the company started to grow, I really, really used those relationships to kind of grow my career and really push the business forward.
Super cool. I do think everyone in marketing has gone through this. How many people got your email?
Oh gosh, our database is probably like 60,000 people.
Okay, it's really not that bad.
It's not that bad. It was more of like I think the more that I was just like, I was obviously like mortified. But the other thing too is like, we're like a big data business, right? And so everyone thought we were like, people were thinking we were hacked and like all kinds of stuff. So I was like, that I think was probably the worst part of it. But then you had people on the sales team that customers or like prospects and all these people were writing them back like, hey, just got this weird email. And so they're like, look, I got people to respond to me that hadn't responded to me in like months. And I was like, well, at least some sales meetings came out of it.
And maybe some pipeline triggered because of that campaign.
Yeah.
Allyson,
exactly.
I love your response about trust and these relationships, that when you build those trusting relationships, that people forgive the errors. Sometimes they're errors of action, sometimes errors of inaction, but it lets you move past this and saying, I trust Allyson, therefore, we moved on and they've got your back. Now you make 17 of those. You're like, hey, we got to talk about something. Even if they still trust you, they want to talk about it, being like, you really have out of body experiences sometimes. But I think that's great. And I think for our listeners who are investing, because those trusting relationships, it takes time, and it's so easy to burn it and so hard to build it.
Oh yeah, that's for sure. And I think when you're thinking about building that trust, it's two things, right? It's doing what you said you were going to do and doing that consistently. And if you can do that, then people will trust you. They'll forgive the mistakes that you make, because 9 times out of 10 you're delivering top-notch work, right? And then also when you build those relationships, and not just in your department, that's the other thing that I see people do a lot. And it's a big hindrance on your career, is when you're so insular, like you're only focused on like relationships within marketing, within product, within engineering, whatever it may be. And I was super lucky at LiveRamp because I had started when the company was like 40 people. And I was kind of like a Swiss Army knife. So I was doing like everything, including like onboarding. So I was the first person you talked to when you got hired. I did like your whole like onboarding training schedule, all of that. And so I met everybody from across all different departments. And then I kept trying to like branch out of marketing so I could have all of those relationships across the company. And then you start, when you work on like cross-functional projects, you have those relationships to lean on. So I think that's super important when you're building your career.
Allyson, I've, this, doing what you said you're going to do and do it consistently.
Mhm.
I think that is totally foundational to that. I would also add to that, to the people listening, it's like doing what's hard,
Yeah.
but right sometimes.
Mhm.
And when people see you make the hard call, like the one that you're like, but it's the right thing to do. And then someone goes, I know, in this case, I know Allison's going to have my back, and you own that. So it's like when you have those moments, and you don't get them often, but when you have to like either fall on the sword or do the hard thing, you can really build your brand.
Yeah, that's huge. That's huge. When you make a tough call and it's like, look, we got to like, this is just going to be hard work, but it's the right thing to do. And it's the right thing for the business and et cetera. People really respect that because you're not taking the easy route and just getting something done, right? You're doing something of quality. And people want to be associated with that, right? Like if you're leading a project and you're doing what's right for the business and you do it and you're, even though it's hard, people want to align themselves to that as well, which makes you a great leader.
Love that. Yeah, the consistency of doing what you say you will do is actually more rare than common, and I think people recognize that and doing it in a consistent manner, because it's really easy to do the right thing one time, but doing it 10 times out of 10, that's where the big deal is. And to your point, Mike, doing the hard things are usually the right things to do. That's why they're hard.
Like eating your vegetables, right? Like nobody wants to do that, but you have to.
That's a nice mom example, but yes, absolutely, that is hard to do.
Or admitting when it's your fault.
Exactly.
Being totally transparent, saying,
being vulnerable.
I sent that out to 60,000 people.
Yeah, that was me.
Let's talk about. Thank you for sharing that. Let's talk a little bit about. There are a lot of Silicon Valley companies out there. There's TechCrunch, there's Faster, there's a lot of publications for startups. And many times or often there are, for lack of better word, there's like this like romantic stories of startups that couldn't be farther from the truth. Like there's articles that you read about startups on like a Business Insider or Huffington Post or TechCrunch, whatever. And they describe this journey that doesn't exist. And people who work in startups who think in the US in English you say like the sausage making, like the truth behind this company that you're building. Many times it's so different. Like the reality is so completely different than the stories or the journalists who describe it. From your experience, going through ups and downs, being in the early stage of a startup to later stage, what is a fundamental truth that you have come to realize is bullshit, is not true at all, that you know for a fact it's not at all how it goes?
I think it's around culture building, right? And so I think that a lot of people don't understand how to actually build a culture within their company. And, I feel like when you hear about startups, they're like, oh, I'm staying because of the people, the culture, et cetera. And that's like a word that kind of gets like thrown around a lot, and it's broad, it's ambiguous. But I think one of the things is that it just happens, right? I just think that's a fallacy. Like to build culture and to build that camaraderie, especially in a startup, because you're doing so much grunt work and you're doing, jobs of 10 people, et cetera. It actually takes work to do that. It doesn't just happen overnight. And I think that's something that people really should invest in and take the time to do it right. So that's one thing that I always feel like people are like, oh yeah, this like culture, it's like, oh, it just like came out of thin air. And it's like, it took a lot of work and a lot of people to be bought in on it.
Let's talk about that a little bit more, just because I could not care less about culture 6 years ago, and now I'm obsessed about culture. And again, being like a left hemisphere brain focused person, it's fascinating to see how the shift. I used to care only about product and technology, and now it's important. But the people and the culture, like what do you do I think what is it, Ben Horowitz had said in this is a book he wrote about you are what you do, and he was like, what people do when you're not in the room is kind of like the definition of culture, or at least part of it. What dive deeper into it? You must have seen some shitty cultures and some great cultures. What Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, what I would say is that, culture is built off like the values, right? So I think one of the things that companies should do right off the bat is like, what is our values? Like, what do we stand for? What is the work that we do stand for? And when you have that kind of like those values and people align themselves to that, they're much more mission driven, and they're going to achieve that vision that you have for the company. Who was really good at it was Orrin Hoffman. I mean, there was like, we had our values, and everybody, like the first thing that you were reading through these values, we're super transparent with it. And then there was like things that were like, kind of that he listed on top of that. Like, we didn't have any like rules, right? There were, or policies. It was all guide, like it was a guide, right? And he wanted to hire people with like good judgment, and so there's all these little things that he all like, that seemed small, but like at the time it was building this culture and bringing people together, to kind of rally around these values. And so, and like one of the other, like, I love this one. It was like, you need to respond to an email in 12 hours. That was just like something we had to do. And people got called out if they did not reply to an email in 12 hours. But again, that was like the sense of urgency that he created. And like the people that were like, and it just brought really driven people. And I think that was a huge success of why LiveRamp, the journey that it had and the growth that it had, is because Orrin really instilled these values and did all these other like small things that contributed to that as well.
Do you find Orrin or a founder as the main influencer or constituent of a culture?
Yes, 100%. Because they're all looking to you. Like I think, and then there's like people around, right? Like I said, like in the early days, I was kind of like our HR, which is terrifying to look back at now. But like I was like a big driver of culture as well, right? Like I'm the first person you meet. I'm the person that's like helping you through like your onboarding and all of that. And that's a big piece of the culture. And so, like one of the things that we did really early on, and now I look back on it, I'm like, I cannot believe we pulled this off, is we do like these huge camping trips, and everything we had to do was like all together. So we wanted to do this huge camping trip with like 100 people. And I look back on it now and I'm like, that was such a big, and Orrin was there with his family, and he was just like so invested. And I think, so he really created it, and he was like kind of like the North Star. And then you have other people within the company that are kind of like the tent poles, right? Like you're kind of setting it up with them, but you have to be bought into the CEO's vision.
Love that. That's interesting. Awesome. Very interesting and insightful. So different. Like I get what you're saying about founder setting up culture, at least initially. But having you remember so many things about LiveRamp right now that are coming up, that it seems very significant. That culture there seems to have been very significant.
It was very, very significant. And I think you had a lot of people that their tenure was like, I mean, Annika Gupta that just left, she was there for over 10 years. I was there for 8. There's a lot of people like that are still there, that are still very, very invested. And I think now about like at TrustRadius, we have a CEO, he's very pragmatic, very data driven, and the whole company is like that. And I think he really sets the tone and sets those values, and everyone's like aligned to it. But again, like I think you need your stakeholders within the company as well to drive culture.
Love that. Mike, what about you? What is that truth? What's an absolute truth for you that you think is messed up, is not true at all?
Well, Allyson, I think you crushed the response on culture. I think it does start with mission, and it does start with really clearly defined values as your guide rails, as you sort of articulated. I think that's beautifully articulated, and that your CEO better be the chief cultural officer, or your culture is going to suck. Period. Full stop. And I'm sure, if you were doing the onboarding in a 40-person company, you were his chief foil for implementing the culture. So it's because when you say it, it was so clear what was to be done. So, that is really impressive. Gil, I would say that sometimes funding brings waste. So people do these scrappy things. They bootstrap, they hire people like Allyson, who was the self-proclaimed Swiss Army knife, and can do a lot of stuff. But then you get funding, and you have different types of funding. Some of it might be angel, some of it might be venture growth, private equity, all the way on the continuum. But you get this funding, and people are like, okay, we can spend, and then they change how they do things. They're not getting that return on investment mentality when they're really pushed to scrap for dollars. And I feel that changes companies and makes their failure rate higher.
Mm-hmm.
So you took the money, which means your failure rate should go down. You have more funds, but it goes up because they change how they did things. And unfortunately, I mean, we're awash, fortunately or unfortunately, we're awash in capital. So they're throwing money at companies. And if you look at the venture capital models, they only need 2 of their 20 investments to be smashing successes. And they don't even care about the zeros. They're like, okay, just go away and stop bothering me. I mean, in private equity, it's the ratio is they don't want any of their investments to go to zero, and they don't have many upsides. So they care a little bit more about that. But it is, I want to make sure that people out there, this story is, don't change that discipline that you have on doing stuff to use, it's not like, oh, now we can just hire retained recruiters to get the best and the brightest. You're not going to always get the best and the brightest. You might spend $270,000 and then give them a big chunk of equity and, give them a signing bonus or whatever else you do. But you're like, this person does not walk on water in all instances. So you sort of demand that discipline. And it's important for senior management to make sure that discipline has a check in the values, that we're not just going to be drunken sailors, because it changes people, which is why, kids of rich families are typically shit shows. Like what do you do? Warren Buffett said, give your kids enough money so they can do, they can be anyone they want, but don't give them enough money so they can do nothing.
Right.
And it's true with your company. You can't have this change in attitude. Like, all right, we could just spend. It really ruins companies, and it's terrible.
What's the saying? More money, more problems.
More money, more problems. That is for sure true. It's also in the personal life, but very interesting. You touched something very, like, Metadata was, fortunately, I guess, based on what you just said, a very poor company. We were super poor to the extent where we had to optimize our unit economics so well, just because there was no other way. It's either this or dying or selling to someone too early. And I remember raising our Series A. We raised our Series A last year, and we raised our Series A. It was a big announcement on TechCrunch, and the first leadership meeting and the first all hands meeting after that, you're talking about optimizing and doing further economical optimizations. And my team is like, what the fuck? We just announced the TechCrunch Series A. Like, everyone just saw the $6.5 million we just raised. I was like, yeah, but don't you want to make sure we'll get the next round as well? And it was such an unpopular decision to do further optimization after raising money. But that's exactly what I was afraid of. I was afraid that we're going to it's going to be a shit show. We're just going to, recruiters is such a classic example, but it could be many, many other things. And after we optimized, something very interesting happened. That 2 months after raising the Series A, we got follow-on investment without asking for it from that lead investor, because they saw what happened. They saw, like, 60 days after getting the money, we only got better in the way we spent money, and that was a shocker, a little bit of a shocker to them. So I think it's very important. It's very hard to do, because we live in this crazy bubble, this like startup world, especially in the Valley. Somewhere other places it's not the same. Like Europe, startups are very, very different. But in the Valley, you get money with a mandate. You should spend this money in a year and a half or 2 years max. If you're not going to spend it in a year and a half, don't take the money. We're not going to give it to you. I know I rejected Series A investments because I refused to spend it the way the VCs wanted to. And so it's hard to do. It's one of those tough decisions that you better make. And so I think it's very, very interesting, a controversial point, especially for entrepreneurs.
Well, there certainly are opportunities with giant total addressable markets that are changing the world, and you're in a race with someone else. That I would change that paradigm. But I think if people were really honest with themselves, most companies aren't that. You're not going to be like Uber racing Lyft, and where one gets 90% market share and the other one gets 10. I think in many cases, you're trying to prove your business model. You're trying to prove your unit economics. You're trying to make sure that you understand your true CACs and your segmentations, and change your product based on what the feedback that you get. So it's not spend and just drive yourself, because most of those companies are lawn darts. They're like, it's just a mess.
Even if you are, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, and the other thing is when you pour money into a company, what happens if there's not fundamental like process on like how like each of the departments are like functioning? What I've seen in the past is that they kind of just throw more bodies at it instead of thinking about like the process. Like product is a really good at like, let's just throw some bodies on it and we have funding to do that, instead of actually critically thinking about, okay, from an engineering standpoint, from a product like vision, roadmap, etc., like what are we trying to do and build it properly versus throwing warm bodies at problems.
I couldn't agree more. You're just talking about like.
See that. Go ahead.
No, please continue. It's your point.
No, I was just saying, like, you see it if the product sucks, you throw bodies to patch it in the call center or customer support. And you're like, you should fix the product. It's got a problem.
Exactly. Yeah, there's a bottleneck. That's exactly it. There's a bottleneck there that you are not aware of if you just shower it with resources. More resource will just make that bottleneck disappear for a short period of time. Again, we were poor just because I couldn't raise enough money, or just because whatever excuses I used. But at the end of the day, we kind of like to get to capacity where the bottlenecks are exposed, and then you can put investment into those bottlenecks. If you do it prematurely, you will never know what those bottlenecks are. You will know, I guess, but in a year from now or 2 years from now, when it's too late.
Yeah, exactly. It's too late, and you have all this tech debt, and it's a mess. And what it actually hinders your growth in the long term. So I would say like the other thing with like funding is like, okay, there's always a short-term gain, but what's your long game? And I think that's another thing that you have to think about when you go for funding is, there's stuff that you need to do now, right, to set a really strong foundation, but that foundation needs to support your vision going forward as well. And when people aren't thinking like that, or you only have one person that's thinking like that and the rest of the company is very short-term, that's where you run into problems.
Allyson and Mike, I just realized I have 4 minutes left. I sometimes have so much fun that I forget to manage time, so it's your fault, but thank you. Before we finish, if you go back 10 years or what have you, as many years as you'd like, I won't call you out on your age. What would be the one most important piece of advice you would give yourself or our listeners that are earlier stage in their career, like a piece of advice that is monumental, really would change path?
Pick your battles. You can't spread yourself too thin. You can't try to change everything at one time. So pick your battles and think about things in like a phased approach. Because as soon as you spread yourself too thin and you're kind of all over the place, you really don't achieve anything. And that's something I learned really early on in my career is you try to control everything, you keep everything really tight to your chest, and you're just, it's a recipe for failure.
Do you have an example in mind that you'd like to share?
No, I was just, I'm, have you guys ever heard of Enneagram? Have you heard of this? It's like a personality test.
The psychological test. Yes, I've done that.
Yeah, it's like a Myers-Briggs, but like a different. So I'm in like an 8 and a 7, which means that I'm like a control freak.
I don't remember control freak being one of the definitions. I think you gave it a little bit of a personal taste to it.
I summarized it. So I feel like that was something early on in my career that I was just like, I wanted to be involved in everything. I wanted to review everything. And it was just like, at some point I was doing everyone a disservice, and including myself, because I wasn't delegating. I wasn't setting up processes to actually scale. And I was trying to dealing with problems with sales, dealing with customer success, dealing with product, and it was just trying to take too much on, and then nothing really got the attention that it needed.
How do you know how to prioritize?
So couple things. I think especially in marketing, what is going to move the needle, right? Like what is actually going to generate the pipeline that we need, or the revenue, et cetera? Like, where's the money essentially, right? And then from there, the second thing that you kind of look at is, what are the kind of like foundational things that are going to be scalable and repeatable, right? And that's what I think in marketing is really important, and people don't necessarily think of, is like, if you set a really good foundation for like your brand marketing, your demand gen, product marketing, and there's a lot of process there, and people just know how to get shit done, and it's all scalable. I mean, that's really where you want to be.
Awesome. Love that. That is very insightful. Mike, what about you?
I love Allyson's answer on scalability of yourself, leveraging yourself. It's really important. For me, it was, winning with and through teams. Like, you can't do this yourself. You have to do it with surrounding yourself with great people. And I think it starts with, not even if you're an individual contributor, your pre-manager, making sure that you manage up and across well. And then as you start building your team out, when you're given more resources, making sure that you surround yourself with good people, or train your people up so they can be good. And if they're not, you need new people. Like, you need projects, these turnaround projects, because world-class, production comes from world-class teams. And you just can't, you can't suffer through it. So it's like this whole engine that you build. And quite literally, if you're that individual contributor, 25 years old, first time you're getting a little bit of a budget, a little bit of project, it's like some of the people you work with, you're going to be working with at your third and fourth company down the road, recruiting them out of your old place. Like, work with great people. It is so much fun.
Awesome.
I totally agree with that.
Yeah, I completely agree. Do you want to add something, Allyson, after you finish that sip?
Yeah, I know. I'm actually perfectly timing the beer with this podcast timing. So I'm
That's
happy
important.
about that. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, hire the right people. I mean, I've made some questionable hires, and it hurts you so much. I won't tell who those people are, but but
you all know who you are.
You all know who you are. But I think you need to make those those hires that you can rely on, that are, going back to our point, like, that are going to do what they say and do that consistently, right? So totally agree with you,
Allyson, you mentioned Enneagram. The Predictive Index has a behavioral assessment. So
okay.
I'm predicting from watching you for 55 minutes that you're a captain. So go to www.trypi.com/Z, my initial.
Okay.
And you take 5-minute assessment. It'll give you your results, and you're going to be a captain. I predict it.
And he's going to share it with Mike.
Yes, I'll send it back to you guys.
If you don't like it, you just send it. I'll double delete it. No one will ever know. You tell Gil if I was right, though.
Okay, awesome.
Hey, Mike and Allyson, I really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you very much. Cheers. You're awesome guest and very insightful. Thank you very much. And hey, have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Thank you very much.
Thanks again for joining us. I hope that you enjoyed today's discussion and will tune in again. Find all of the B2B Category Creators episodes at Metadata.io. And if you have any feedback, topics, or would like to be a guest on the show, please reach out.